We're here with one of our good friends at Nearshore Americas, Atul Vashistha. In fact, one of the top 10 finishers in the Nearshore Americas Power 50 for 2011. Very proud of Atul's accomplishment there. And we're also wrapping up basically day 2 of the Brazil IT Global IT Forum. And Atul and I and others have been involved in some very interesting discussions. And I think what we'd like to check in with you first on, Atul, is what's top of mind right now coming after, probably 24 panels and lots of different discussions?
I think a few things stand out. And one of them is that they are purposely crafting an IT industry that may not be the big factories that we're used to around the world. And what I thought was maybe a limitation may actually be a planned effort, which is recognizing what works and what they're really good at. And if they can do that effectively outside of Brazil, I think they may have a competitive advantage in a certain sector. I think that kind of jumps out at me.
Sure, absolutely. So what signs are you seeing that it's outside of Brazil? In other words, are we seeing, I'm personally hearing a little bit more about regionalization, using offshore centers within nearshore markets, but what else are you seeing?
So I think, so you're definitely seeing, because Brazil is a big economy, 5th, 6th, depending on which year you look at. So there's all these multinationals that are now being attracted to Brazil because they want to serve the domestic market. And I think that itself is bringing a different set of customers to these domestic players. And I think we heard from Johnson & Johnson today, and this is a client that's based out of the US, right? And so, so this company is providing them services for the US market. And it was interesting to hear where the value proposition is. He didn't talk about, they do it for less, they do it, and they time zones. He talked about how they are coming up with ideas, right? So it's not about just sitting back and asking us what we should do. They're actually coming back and challenging their thinking. If that is a consistent practice or skill set across the IT industry in Brazil, I think they have a significant advantage in software development.
That's interesting. So we're miles away from where we might have been with the India model, based on what you're talking about here. So then maybe there's an effort to pave an entirely new path.
Yeah, I think so. I think what they're saying is that, we're not focused on creating software factories because cost is not necessarily our advantage. What that means is that we have to reduce the total cost for our clients. So if they're talking about software development or digital media, what we have to do is make sure they get what they're looking for and they get the benefit of the fact that we've learned from other clients instead of just listening to them and creating a software factory. Okay. So I think that could over time be an advantage.
Sounds pretty compelling. Yet even on that path, I think there's some risks involved. One of the things that you've been pretty outspoken about is generating enough talent. We spent a lot of time talking about this, but not just generating internal, Brazilians, but do you think what's the issue about getting foreigners here to help stimulate this environment?
So the immigration policy, the visa policy is restrictive, right? If you look at almost any market that is developing significantly, you see a lot of foreigners participating in that growth. And sometimes it's because they're coming there to run companies, other times they're coming there to run operations. And Brazil is probably most restrictive. Last year they gave out 56,000 visas, whereas China gave out 224,000. And you start looking at the UK and the United States, you're talking about 500,000 each, right? So I think if you want to attract the best talent, if you want managers from all over the world want to run Brazil operations, you do have to have a policy that attracts talent. And I think we did hear a good story about, so partly is attract talent, the other part is the Brazilians that have gone out there and gotten educated, incentive for them to come back, right? So it seems like they have a program now where more Brazilians are going to go outside to study, learn, and hopefully, because the economy is vibrant, come back. But I do believe you have to make a change to the immigration policy to make it easy for work visas, because as more multinationals come, they're going to likely to require those visas.
Sure. Something I could never quite put my finger on is IT in fact a strategic objective of the current government, or is it not?
So that was one of the questions I asked, right? I asked the minister that. It is not marketed as a strategic objective, but it's very clear that because of the efforts of Brascom, certain changes are starting to take place. So one of the ideas that I wanted to put out, that I was talking about a little bit earlier, was I think Brascom ought to have kind of whether it's a 5-point, 7-point, or 10-point program. So let's take a look at what are the biggest challenges. It's taxes, right? It's the laws, like the laws regarding freelance is not clear. It's education, it's the skill gap, it's migration. It's the technical business skills, it's the participation of universities. Imagine if you had a 5-point or 7-point program where you say, as Brascom, we believe the following has to happen for this industry to be a world-class industry. And let's put it out there so that the government or the politicians adopt it irrespective of what party it is. Because, and once they adopt it, I think it's a very clear symbol that it's not one of 9 or one of 19. It actually is one of the key pillars for this government or for this country.
Are you ever struck by the fact that it seems, one could argue that Brazil has got tremendously great things going on, but it's a bit of an island amid the rest of Latin America. Do you see an opportunity for this country to be a little bit more focused on the other $10 billion or so export market for the rest of LATAM?
Yeah, so we know that Brazil is about 50% of the LATAM economy. And so there's a tendency for Brazil players to stay in Brazil and not do a lot outside. In fact, whenever I'm spending time in Mexico or Peru or Colombia or Chile, the message is that you have to have a strategy for LATAM and a strategy for Brazil. So I think even outside looking in, there's a thought that you do have to be different. And I think you do. Partly it's language, right? And partly it's the way the laws in Brazil work today, that there's certain things that are more effectively done from within Brazil than outside Brazil. But now if you kind of turn it around and say, if you're a Brazilian company, what would you want to do in LATAM? And I think if you look at the state of many clusters, and I think Roger was talking about clusters, right? Financial services, agribusiness, energy utilities. I think those industries have the ability, and IT in those industries has the ability to play a LATAM-wide role. But you're not going to be able to do that until you cross the language barrier, and whether that's English and Spanish. And I think the second is you have to look at business practices that go beyond Brazil. But I think it's a matter of time. When a market like Brazil is exploding, if you think about it, IT grew 40%, IT services. It's hard for a company that's growing 40% to say, let me put another 40% outside of Brazil,
sure.
Right? So I think you'll probably see that expansion as anytime there's a slow growth, you're likely to have them look at other opportunities. But if the market continues to grow at 20, 30, 40%, I don't see why they would want to look outside.
Well, speaking of that issue, we heard a lot of doom and gloom yesterday from the economists, experts, about a lot of the turmoil on the developed economy side. So being a globalization guy, what is this all going to mean for LATAM and Brazil, particularly for IT services? So
I think the interesting thing is, if you look at the penetration of technology across the world, right? And if you look at the penetration of IT services across the world, we are still in early stages. Now, most of the revenue for a lot of companies in India is driven by the developed part of the world. So whether that's Europe or US. Well, that's not Brazil. So the interesting thing about Brazil is, I don't think Brazil is going to have as much of an impact because of the turmoil in the US and Europe in IT services. Because a lot of that is being fueled internally. Whereas a place like India is much more likely to go through the same valleys and highs that you see in Europe and US. So I think Brazil is a lot more protected in the IT services side than some of the established players that we see.
Well, let's make a plan. A year from now, Atul, we'll check back on that possible prediction there.
Wonderful.
And great to see you again, as always.
Pleasure, Kirk. Thank you.